Hey everyone, it's the tiniest of Logans back with another video for you, and today, well, in a bit, we're going to be taking a look at how good the Powercolor RX56 Vega Nano can be, considering it's so flipping small. Okie dokie, so yes, we are back, and I have a Vega Nano. Now, as far as we're aware, this is the only one that's in the UK at the moment, because I might have brought this home from Computex with me. Now, Powercolor did say I was allowed to do it, but it was just so I could get home, get some testing done, and have a good play with it for you within some decent time frames. Now, it's basically ITX sized, it's tiny. You can see the PCI Express slot up there, so you can see how small it is. It's quite a plain looking card, but again, think about ITX kind of boards and that sort of thing, and that's pretty much how big it is. You do still get a 8-pin and a 6-pin power on it, and heatsink on it is quite plain. It's not loud unless it's provoked. If you overclock it and stuff, you do really need to crank that fan up. But what I've done is I have done some range of normal tests, straight out the box tests as we normally would do. We had to play around with some undervolting, and then we also did some undervolting but with more power boost added, and then manually overclocking the frequencies as well to see, you know, what we could get out of it. Now, what I would say is when we did do that overclocking, it's not something that I would say is livable on a 24/7 basis. It does give you the kind of idea what might be possible with this. And also, when it comes to small rigs, a lot of people now are favouring water. So then you wouldn't get any of the noise issues if you were going down that route. You may just want a small, doesn't really matter about noise, all out kind of gaming rig for LANs and stuff. But anyway, so I've done what I can do for you, and I've done full ranges of tests on all of them as well. The best bit with that is if you do click the link through from wherever to go to the Overclock 3D website, there's all the games and all the benchmarks. I've got all 3 test runs done as well. So we've put a fair bit of effort into getting this one out. So the only real things other than the power connectors that we need to talk about is you get 3 display ports on the back and a HDMI. You can see there's quite a lot of ventage going on. And then when it comes to the actual card itself, there is a cooling plate that goes all the way around, as you can see, which helps to keep the outside and the VRMs and stuff cool. Obviously it's HBM2, so that's the memory is all cooled with the main heatsink itself. And they say 1156 megahertz on the core, but then up to 1471 with the natural boost, depending on environmentals like your power supply and cooling and all that sort of stuff. So we did it in our normal graphics card test rig, which is a big airy rig, big meaty power supply, plenty of cooling, and we ended up getting, well, we were getting on average, because what you need to remember, and yes, I'm going to be schooling some of you, but 1156 is just how it comes out the box. Average will be how it evens out, and then we've also give you a peak score. So the peak for us was 1415, so 1415 megahertz. But then the average over our test procedure was 1248 megahertz. Now, average is more important than a peak. I do get fed up with the other camp of the 1080 Ti owners all saying that they're running 2100 megahertz, and it's like, yeah, okay, you might get that as a boost for 1 nanosecond, but a lot of those people would actually have a faster rig if they clocked it down a little bit and then made sure their average was higher, because if you overclock it too much, the average can actually drop. I know it sounds weird, but that's just the way it is. So you have to keep an eye on that average, which is why I always put it in my GPU test reviews. So the average for that was 1248, that's out the box. Now, when we did an undervolt, we ended up finding the sweet spot for the undervolt for our card, but it may be different for you at home, so please do it. So if you're going to undervolt it, do a stock test, get your average, get your, I normally do 30 minutes of Unigen, time it, and then get my average. But you need to do it the exact same time, every time, the same amount of time length, the same run, to see what you're going to get, so it's directly comparable. And then once you have got your stock, you can then try with your undervolt. Now we found our scores went down with the undervolt until weirdly we got to 100 millivolts undervolt, and then they jumped back up again. Don't know why, haven't got a Scooby, just telling you this is what happened. But also at 100 millivolts, not only did the clock speeds kind of come back up again, but they also, all of the scores for all of the benchmarks came up a little bit as well. So you'll see that in the graphs in a little bit. Now, weirdly, with the undervolt, you could get one run with Unigine where the scores would all look wibble, and then you could get, and I don't mean scores, I mean the clock speeds could all look wibble, and then you could get another one where it was absolutely fine. So there's definitely some kind of drivery sort of software-y glitch going on there. So that's also, if you end up getting one of these, keep that in mind at home. Don't necessarily have a panic. Watch the benchmark scores with an undervolt, not necessarily always the clock speeds, because we ended up getting what it was saying our average was 885, which meant it plummeted, but it was also saying our peak was 2098, which is mental. And we don't know what it was. And then we could do another run and it would say the peak was 1446 and the average was 1300. So it was genuinely quite strange. But the other thing that was quite strange about just that undervolt was that the scores were always better than stock. Again, don't know why, because when we pushed past that, we then started playing around with extra power limit, turning the overclock up as well. So we've spent a lot of time messing around with that, and then the scores all went up even more, quite a lot if I'm honest. So the average ended up being 1448 megahertz, and the peak was 1603 megahertz. Power limit for those scores, so at stock it was 404, undervolt was 476, but then a few more little tweaks, and then the overclock was 488. Now that is watts, but that is also the entire system, not just the graphics card. But it does give us a rough idea about what's going on. The system itself normally pulls about sort of 210 watts from the wall with an incredibly basic, like passive, just about doing a display GPU in it. So it gives you a rough idea what's going on, but we always like to do the full system. Anyway, so that was that. Temperatures, 75 for the stock and undervolt, and then it did go up to 83 for the overclock. But again, don't forget, with the overclock, it was literally on the bleeding edge, just getting what we could possibly get out of the rig itself. So, moving on to 3D Mark, when we pop a graph up, you can see that overclock makes a massive difference. And again, you can see here that just turning the volts down actually gave us a performance increase, which is kind of weird, but it works. So that's something that you can think about. It didn't really make a lot of difference with temperatures, but I think the 75-degree thing is like a threshold. So essentially, it spins the fan. Compared to that, is like being a point. Do you get what I mean? Anyway, it's off most of the time anyway, and it's just one of those things where it's to make sure that it doesn't really make a lot of noise when it doesn't need to. Ghost Recon Wildlands. This is a decent graph because you can see there's a big step in between each one of the tests. Don't forget, you can go to the Overclock 3D website. There's loads more tests there. There's loads more games there. I just have to try and condense it for my kind of way of doing things to try and put it into a video format for you. But there is a lot more information there if you want to go and have a look and pick through it. And the graphs are always quite big and meaty, so it does give you a good way that you can compare it against some of the others. So like really for us, when you look at these, you can see that the Nano with the overclock is up there mixing with some of the 64s even. So it does show that there's quite a bit to get from this if you're willing to put the effort in with playing around with the overclock settings. Exactly the same again when we go to Deus Ex, which is quite a stressful game. You can see that just above the Nano overclock is the reference RX64 in a turbo mode. So there's quite a bit to be had from it. Now, like I said, though, the graphs do make it look kind of good in that you wouldn't really, with that full-blown crazy mode, want to have that on your desk on a quiet night, for example, unless you really don't care about noise. Most of us, it would drive us nuts. But you do need to remember this is a very, very small card. So the reason why I was doing it is to show you the performance that it's actually capable of. Yes, it's a bit, you know, kind of highline, but I'm pretty sure you're going to end up seeing water blocked versions of these or water blocks out there. You could even really, when you think about it, end up getting an adapter and putting an AIO block on it, because yes, you're going to need an air cooler to keep the VRMs happy, but if you can keep the HBM cool and the actual core nice and chilly on it, like much chillier than air, then you could end up with a, let's say for argument's sake, you have 120mm fan to keep the VRMs cooler, and then you have your AIO to keep the core itself really, really chilly and happy. That could be a really good way of making the most out of this, and I'd probably then go as far as to say you'd probably be able to get away with some kind of version of that going on in a smaller system as well. There's lots of kind of ideas and things like that for you to go out and have a look at. Anyway, so it definitely gets the OC 3D approved award. Enthusiast award, I think you probably would need to be an ITX enthusiast to want to get it. I don't really see that many of you out there that are going to find a need for this in a bigger rig, and that's kind of stating the obvious really, but it definitely deserves the OC 3D award. But then I did have a think about it, and I thought what I would go with in the end, so this is the actual award that it's going to get, is the OC 3D Innovation Award, because there's not been many people that have bothered to do a great deal with the Vegas, because at the end of the day, most people are just, the ones that they are managing to get the actual cores out of AMD for, they're just letting them go to miners really, really quickly. And this is what the bit that I want to close with, is the reason why I wanted to have a go with this with Powercolor and a play is because this, for a miner, doesn't really, there's not a lot of cooling going on with it, although, you know what I mean, it's not the sort of card that most of them are ever going to pick up. So essentially what Powercolor ended up doing when they made this card was probably ended up making the least desirable the least desirable Vega for a miner that they possibly could have done. So it's quite a brave choice when you think that they literally don't even need to think about selling them normally, and this is almost one that they're trying to do to put them off. So that is a hella brave choice, and that's one of the reasons again why Innovation Award was much deserved. Now yes, this was kind of quick and shoving it through, but with all due respect, with a graphics card like this, it's really going to be about the performance numbers that it chucked out. And I found it kind of interesting going from the stock to the just the undervolt and still getting that little bit of a performance increase. But it made a hell of a difference when you got all busy with the power boost, a little bit more of an overclock on, you know, an actual core speed overclock on top as well. It certainly then did come into its own, didn't it?